Three Podcast. I'm your host, Jim, and joining me today, as always, is Ryan Janelle. Ryan, how are things today?
They're great. Again, technology, gotta love it to hate it sometimes, but we're back on the air. So 2025, starting
We're,
off
we're,
well.
we're yeah, we're back on the air temporarily. We've already had a couple of power glitches today because we have high winds in my area.
Yep.
So if you lose me, just hold on tight, and I'll be right back. But today we're actually going to be talking about the hidden costs of retirement for Canadians. And I thought, and you and I both thought it was a good topic around this time of year because it's almost the end of January. Traditionally, this has been considered RSP season, right? So everyone's
Mhm.
thinking about RSPs and if they should contribute into an RSP, if they shouldn't contribute into an RSP, and if they're going to contribute into something for retirement purposes, what should that be? And we're not going to talk about any of that. And the reason why we're not going to talk about should you be in an RSP or not is because when people are making the decision, and this is based on my experiences when I worked at the bank and accepting deposits and as an advisor, um, most of the time, the decision behind making the contribution was either how much can I afford or what's the max amount that I'm allowed. So some people are able to do that. Others, it's more to offset some taxes that they're going to pay. So instead of paying it this year, they're going to defer it for the future. But very few people actually make their deposit or contribution based on what they actually need when they retire. And many times people do their thing and then they get close to retirement and like, oh, we don't have quite enough.
Mhm.
So we want to talk about some of the hidden costs for you to consider and maybe changing your approach when either contributing into an RSP for retirement or a TFSA or whatever type of account you decide to invest in for your future retirement, that instead of trying to base it just solely on what can I put in today, you might want to consider how much do I need to be putting in so I can actually meet those retirement goals. Does that make sense, Ryan?
Very much so. And I will link this back to cash flow. Our program Cash Flow Solutions is really focused on this. And again, understanding what's coming in and what's going out. And I wrote this blog over a year ago, to be honest. So Jim and I were trying to discuss retirement conversations about this podcast, and I realized, oh my, I've written this, and it was my dad who was the one that brought up a lot of these things. So I started plugging away at some of the information that he was bringing up, articles that he had sent me, and kind of combining them all into a one-stop shop for not only him but other people that we've been working with. And when it comes to the cash flow piece, that was the biggest determination of people truly understanding what retirement truly felt like for them and things that they definitely did not consider because the conversation wasn't happening amongst their peers. We want to start that conversation and we want to be able to enlighten people, and whether I think we're going through some or all of the blog post article that I wrote of a lot of things that people need to consider when it comes to the hidden costs in retirement and often unplanned. And again, our job is to make people aware and educate people on those things. So that's what kind of inspired. So thanks, Dad, for inspiring this kind of dialogue. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first one that we should talk about, for some it's obvious and for others it's not. And we're going to be speaking based on Canadian retirees because we're based in Canada. And this might be a little bit different than it is for some of our US listeners. But healthcare costs, that's a big one, right? There's out of pocket expenses that you kind of have to plan for when you retire that you might not anticipate,
Mhm.
right? So there are certain things that are covered by the government, but not everything's covered by the government. And as we get older, we start to deal with more medical and health issues, potentially require more medication for certain ailments, right?
Yeah.
So maybe Ryan, you can speak a little bit to healthcare costs being one of the things that people should kind of plan for as part of their overall retirement planning.
Well, again, like under when going into retirement, understanding what does OHIP cover, what does for some that are lucky enough to have an extended program past their retirement with their company, what are the actual costs that are covered? You know, prescription medication is obviously one of the biggest things that I find when talking with clients is they don't realize the types of prescriptions. And again, we look at family history, we talk about those things, what you could potentially expect in retirement. We talked about on our last podcast, for instance, like if you were to come up with a critical illness, about 50% of total cancer medications are actually covered by our insurance companies. So things like that, dental costs, vision, for those that want a private hospital room, those are all things that are hidden costs that aren't covered under our insurance plan to the extent that we currently think that are covered. And for us to manage and plan for those things, whether it's getting extra types of coverage in retirement, again, best time to get certain type of insurance is when you're younger, uh, and making sure that those things will continue to cover you well beyond age 50, 65, and for Canadians living into their 80s, 90s, and what that's going to cost for them. So
Yeah, and I'm going to use a recent example that my mom had to deal with, and then we'll move on to the next one. But my mom's 75 years old, cataracts in both her eyes. So when she went in to get the eyes looked at, she was told that the cataract lenses were covered by the provincial government here in Ontario. So when we went in, and I went with my mom, we sat down, and she needed both eyes done, and it ended up she was quoted $300 per eye. And I remember asking the doctor, I said, "Well, I thought the province covers the lenses." He said, "Oh no, that's subsidized. So 300 is your copay for each eye." And he said, "Now, if you're able to upgrade to the next level, because the problem with the government subsidized lenses is that eventually they can become blotchy, and you may need to redo them again in the future, right?" So we asked, well, what's the amount for the upgraded level? And it was like $600 per eye.
mhm,
So at the end of the day, she ended up going with the upgraded level. So it was $1,200, $600 per eye, and then she needed new glasses. That was another $300. So these are out of pocket medical expenses that are not covered by the provincial healthcare
yeah,
that we don't anticipate.
yeah.
Right? So we have to kind of build that into your cash flow when we set up a retirement plan for people. So the next one we're going to talk about, Ryan, and we've talked a lot about this next one is long-term care. So maybe since you're the specialist on long-term care, you can provide some insight on why people should plan for that type of expense.
Yeah. So when it comes to long-term care, it's the decision first and foremost. Do you want to stay in your home or are you looking for a potential facility, right? And I know we're going to all be young until we're 100 years old. Uh, but when it comes to staying within our own home, what are the potential things that we need as far as like in-home care, potentially assisted living? And if you're not looking at those things, are you looking to move to an assisted living facility? And what are the costs involved in living within an assisted living? So on the home care, obviously we have a podcast again that talks about uh, you know people wanting to stay in their home longer because the comfort level they've already you know paid off their mortgage, they want to continue to live within their own home, but family may be far away. Or again, that's that conversation that we need to start having. And I guess why we continue to do these podcasts is the conversation. What does the retirement look like when you hit certain points within that? And when do you bring a specialist in? What is the burden that you may want to avoid putting on your family, right? Are your is your family going to be the one coming in and feeding and helping you dress? Are they capable of doing these things? So it's all these like small long-term expenses that again we want to open up the dialogue for people to help. How do we mitigate some of these expenses? And again, we've talked on a previous podcast about making sure that hey, maybe we put the onus on insurance companies when it comes to paying a little bit now to know that in the longer run, the insurance company is going to foot the bill for it in the larger purchases that we have. And again, long term care, when it comes to the people that are close to me too, and I've seen this, it happens so quickly and unexpectedly that we have to make these moves. So it's now is the time. Today is day one to start talking about with your family members, what does that long term care plan look like for you, for them, making sure that your will is up to date. If you have any insurance provided that can help mitigate that cost, because that cost, as we talked about it in our podcast, can be quite expensive and can eat away very quickly onto the money that we've saved for so long for our long-term retirement, our plan to travel, our plan to pass on to children, plan to pass on to a legacy, perhaps a charitable event. So those are things that we want to look at when it comes to long-term care and start the dialogue with people.
Yeah, and I think I want to kind of zero in on this one a little bit. We do offer the My Dignity mobility program, and really where that becomes important is it's easier to budget for an insurance cost than it is to kind of deal with a catastrophic event. And the reason for that is if all of a sudden you're dealing with a mobility issue and you're dealing with a 20, 30, $50,000 bill and you don't have the resources for it, it's coming from your retirement account.
Mm.
And the problem with that is twofold. You're going to pay tax on that withdrawal. So if you need 50, you're probably pulling out 65, maybe 70 to net out that 50. And now you've depleted your capital that you're relying on for the rest of your life in retirement. So we do actually have insurance programs that can assist you with funding some of those expenses, which will allow you to protect your retirement assets throughout retirement. So if you have any questions on the My Dignity program, you can go to our website, tvhfinancial.ca, and you can find it there through the insurance section. Um, the next concern, I guess, Ryan, and it's amazing because when we do retirement projections, we always, always, always incorporate inflation.
Yeah.
Inflation has been reasonable for a very long time, but then we had recently a bit of an outlier in terms of how inflation shot up in a short period of time, and that had a
Yep.
significant impact. I mean, I know retirees that I've read about or heard about who had to go back and get part-time jobs because inflation, food inflation, as an example, was so high they just couldn't put food on the table. There are people who are making families making $100,000 a year that are going to food banks
Yep.
because inflation is high and they can't afford to pay their bills, right? So inflation is definitely a factor in retirement planning. And Ryan, you and I always incorporate inflation as part of our long-term projections. Anything else you want to add to that?
Again, something that costs $100 today is going to cost, in 5 years when you retire, or 20 years for that matter, is going to cost 110 or potentially $200. So it's things that we need to plan for now as a consideration to make sure that you kind of help keep up with that inflation that we're, again, unexpected, but again, we can always expect inflation to kind of fluctuate over the years, but for the most part, the costs are typically going up. So
Yeah, they are. The next thing that we try to anticipate and plan for, which is difficult to do, is taxes on retirement income. So it's difficult today to determine what our tax brackets are going to be 20, 30 years from now. But what we can do is we can structure things in such a way that there is potential some tax efficiencies. And recently, I was at an event where they had a tax specialist talk about how it's you pay more taxes as a single individual in retirement, and it's probably true even before retirement than you do as a couple. Because with a couple, you can do some income splitting, and the overall family income would be lower than if you are a single person retired earning a bunch of retirement income from sources that are taxable, right? So we definitely look at not just what the potential tax bill is going to be. We want to make sure that, again, you are invested in programs that are tax sheltered and have some tax benefits when you do finally draw on those assets. And this is why today people again tend to focus on RSPs. We're deferring the problem. So, from a tax management point of view in retirement, we don't want to necessarily load up your RSPs. We want to have a combination of deposits or investment accounts.
Mm.
Correct?
Yep.
So, the next one, and this has been happening a lot recently with some of my retired clients, is for the retirees who do want to stay at home and they don't want to move into some form of facility or even a condo for that matter, home repairs that becomes quite expensive, right? So I mean, I've had some retirees all of a sudden their windows needed to be done,
Mhm.
and you're looking at a $20,000 to $30,000 bill. If you're taking money from your retirement accounts to fund that, you're again depleting your retirement assets. Same thing with the roof. Depending on the size of the roof, you're looking at $10,000 to $15,000, sometimes $20,000, right? So
Mm.
these are things that, from a cash flow point of view, from a retirement planning point of view, you want to incorporate in your plan. Is you want
Mhm.
to make sure that you have the funds to cover off home maintenance and repairs. Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to add something that we've talked about before too is, as your retirement planning, where do you want to live? And you've mentioned before, like the ideal at one point was to maybe go further north, right? And that you may not have the accessibility to the typical like repairman that you would have in kind of the urban areas, I guess. And that some people were doing those things themselves, right? And when you're in their 70s or 80s, we don't move as quickly as we did in our 30s. Although mentally, we often think we're still in our our 20s or 30s, but it's all things to consider when it comes to home maintenance. Is what is your access to the resources when it comes to downsizing and where you want to live, and making sure that you have access to all the things that are going to be important, whether it's family, activities, and just the day-to-day stuff when it comes to the maintenance of your home. So
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And even things like I think we talked about this in the last episode. For people who live like in a rural area like I do, where I have an acre property, once I reach a certain age, I may not be able to clear or mow my own lawn, even though it's on a riding lawnmower. And there's a cost to have somebody do it. Typically it's $200 to $300 a mow. That could be $200 to $300 a week.
mhm,
So snow removal is another one, right? If you're living in Canada right now, if you're living and retired in Muskoka, Gravenhurst, Bracebridge, you've been paying a lot of money for snow removal. I mean, it's been crazy, right? So these are things that it's difficult to anticipate, but you should plan for when planning for your retirement.
yeah,
Um,
invest
and
invest
then
in
for
a
those,
flamethrower.
yeah, I actually have one of those. I should try
Melt
that.
what melted.
Yeah, pretend I'm Rambo. Um, so, but for the people who don't like the snow and they want to get away from the snow, another hidden cost to retirement is travel, right?
Yeah,
For those people who want to go to Florida, which right now, again, they're probably pretty upset because they got a bunch of snow down there
yeah,
as well. But
yeah,
for people who want to travel and get away from the snow in the wintertime, well, that's another added expense. And I know I have family and friends who have gone to Italy, and I would guess that as a couple, it's probably a $10,000 to $12,000 bill, right?
mhm,
To go to Italy and to stay at Airbnbs and whatever else. But you have to budget for that. That's
yeah,
that's an expense, and you probably want to do those activities during your younger retirement years and not wait until your older retirement years, because I've also had clients, I wouldn't say quite older retirement years, but in their early to mid 70s, who have come back home from trips injured, broken hip or whatever.
yeah,
Our bodies are changing, right? So difficult to deal with those challenges when you're retired and on vacation.
And going back to the planning piece, which is if you're going to be traveling, when it comes to what does our current program cover, our OHIP, and what happens if you get injured? Oh,
Nothing now.
yeah, right. So, well, that's the piece is that people think they may unless you're gonna somehow get yourself back to Canada without anybody noticing that you've been injured, and deal with the pain, right? So, and I've
Well,
heard those
even with
stories.
that, yeah, but even for people who are doing that and they're buying their travel medical insurance,
Mhm.
and with some of them, like they're expensive as you get older.
Yeah,
Many of them don't understand the pre-existing condition clauses,
yeah,
so they're paying a lot of money for travel insurance, thinking that they're covered, and they're actually not. Right? But these are things again you have to kind of plan and budget for when you are retired. These are added expenses that you don't typically worry about when you're younger. Because
yeah,
if you want to travel when you're retired, you're going to do it more frequently. You're going to do it more often because you can.
yeah.
It just means again it's an added cost. So the next one, Ryan, we see this a lot: family support and gifting. This is again very difficult to plan for when you have a child coming to you because, for example, they're looking to buy a home and they require some assistance.
Yeah.
That's potentially eating away at your future retirement. Um, for families, kids who they're going through a divorce, there's expenses there. There's potential support. A younger child can also get sick and not be able to work, and they need support,
Yeah,
right? And as family, you're gonna step in as a parent to do as much as you possibly can. So these are very unexpected, and these are situations where I've seen it's blown up people's retirements
yeah,
because all the money is coming from the retirement plan, and now the parent who's supposed to be retired still working part time, still trying to survive financially because of the family support and gifting
yeah.
that they've again given to other family members. Anything else you want to add to that?
The gifting thing is always a fine balance of understanding you're not sacrificing your own retirement and your longer term potential of long term care, right? I know it's great to gift because often what I see with clients is their ability to see how that gift help that family, whether it's allowing them to go on a vacation or you know potentially buy a car, things like that that come up. But what ends up happening, and I've seen unfortunately, is they've gifted and then they've come into long term health concerns, and all of a sudden they don't have the money to support, and then they feel reluctant to go back to their family to ask for some of that money back. And depending on a family's dynamic, unfortunately, it's something that we face all too often, which is the family support is not there, and they're, as you said, whether they have to go back to work or find other means or just genuinely suffer. And it's truly heartbreaking having those conversations with clients about over gifting or not planning kind of longer term and making sure that they're covered and that their family relationship is a strong piece. So um, yeah, it's probably out of this list probably one of the harder things uh, that I've had to have conversation with when it comes to clients in the gifting and family support. So there's lots of
Yeah, I mean it's a balance, right? It's a
yeah,
fine line because I've had clients who they want to give the assets that they have away and avoid probating and all those things because you can gift money within Canada and not pay tax on it. There's no tax on the gifting itself unless you're triggering some kind of capital gain or sale of an asset. There's a capital gain, then you as the giver would pay the taxes on that. The receiver doesn't pay any taxes on it, but I've always asked the question. I'm like, well, if you give this money away and 5 years from now you require facility care or you're having mobility issues, will you have enough to get you through that? Because, for example, some nicer places are about $10,000 to $12,000 a month. They're
Yep.
expensive.
Yeah.
Not everyone can go into a ten to $12,000 a month facility, but even at 5 or 6 thousand, it's still expensive. You want to make sure that you don't run out of those funds.
Yeah.
So that's the question that I always have: is will you be able to get some of that money back if you gift it today? And in many cases, the giver, potential giver, are unsure.
Mhm.
So I always say better to keep it in hand. You have control over it in case you do need it in the future.
Yeah.
Right? Lifestyle changes. Yeah, I'm guessing a lot of people once they retire, they're out buying Ferraris and stuff. So um,
That's what your plan is, right?
I don't think I'll ever buy a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. Not for the purchase price, more the maintenance. That's another podcast episode.
You're just gonna buy it and live in it, you and Carol, and drive across country.
Live in a Ferrari? You kidding me? No, I'm not a sardine. But anyway, lifestyle change is another one, right? And sometimes, where there's a challenge is you may have retired friends, some in a better financial situation than others, but the group is planning, a cruise or whatever else, and certain people are able to afford it, and others are trying to keep up and they just can't, right? And at first, they might initially try to keep up, so there's a lifestyle change part of it, and then
Yeah.
quickly realize they just can't keep up. They're going to run out of money way too quickly, right? So that's another unexpected thing is lifestyle changes, trying to keep up with not necessarily the Joneses, but your friends and your family, who may be around the same age and retired as well, and in a different financial situation,
Yeah.
right? Anything else you want to add to that?
No, again, just part of our cash flow is just understanding the increased overall expenses that happen and really putting it in writing and being able to talk with us about other potential uh, expenses that could come up. And that way we're slowly kind of planning for kind of a small nest egg on the side just in case something comes up. That way we're either planning through insurance strategies or planning through making sure that it's put aside that you're ready for it instead of sacrificing the plan as a whole and blowing it all up. So
Yeah. Here's another one that kind of sneaks up on people: estate planning and legal fees,
mhm,
right? When you're younger, sometimes it could be just easier, less assets, less people to distribute your assets to. So it might feel less costly as you get older. Now you're dealing with children, grandchildren, spouses, potentially great grandchildren.
mhm,
You want to disperse things a certain way, uh, a little more complicated, which potentially would require bringing in a lawyer to help you with that. So you're going to deal with legal fees. You're going to deal with structuring the estate. Potentially, you're now paying to establish trusts and whatever else. It really all depends on how far out of the coffin you want your hand to be, right? In terms of control.
mhm,
But it's another unexpected one, right? I mean, I just had a meeting recently with a younger client in her 30s. This isn't in her radar, estate planning or whatever else, but it will be 30 years from now for sure.
yeah.
And it'll sneak up, right? So these are the unexpected fees that do come up as well.
Yeah. And when it comes to, it's probably in our top 5 or 10 questions that we often ask clients when we start working with them is, do you have a will or do you have an updated will? Because, you know, what I've run into in my years, and it's not as detailed as yours, Jim, but, in my short run of, almost 10 years, it's the amount of times that I've run into wills that people thought they'd save money by doing going down to your local library or whatever, or their friend that writes up wills on the side, and it ends up blowing up the family trust, and nothing is clear, everything is challenged, and it, again, I guess wills for when you've passed, so unless you don't plan on dying, then there's no point. But you know once that person's passed, it's just it creates like, it's like the fam money makes people crazy sometimes, especially when somebody passes. And as you said, if you want your will or trust or any other legal documents to make sure they're sound, then obviously I would say talk to TVH legal first and foremost. The amount of times that I've seen Sonia, our partner, kind of walk through and really support people and make sure that those things, or seeing the amount of times that she's fixing other errors from the previous. Um, and I will say this only as a side note for learning for a lot of people is what people don't realize is when you pass, a will becomes public document. Talk about people who reach out of nowhere to come challenge your will, especially if you have anything. And when it comes to siblings fighting and things like that, if you don't want any of that stuff to limit the amount of stuff of fighting, then there's ways for us to plan through insurance strategies. There's ways to make sure that the will is sound the way that you want it to be executed, instead of going through, I guess, your family going through all the garbage that tends to happen once somebody's passed. So make sure you're talking to the right people when it comes to this, instead of trying to do one of those do it yourself, $100 packages, but get the right support for it. So
Yeah, it's happened to a couple of my clients throughout the years where they're waiting to claim the estate of a loved one, and then all of a sudden, like out of the blue, an uncle who they thought had passed away, or a cousin who they didn't even know existed, is coming in making a claim on the estate.
yeah,
Now, in those cases, the person making the claim didn't, they weren't entitled to anything, but it delayed the distribution of the estate by another 3 to 4 months, right? So it can happen, and that's why writing everything down, like you said, making sure that your wishes are followed through with after you pass away is really important.
yeah,
And to do it with a professional, and not, again, to your point, some of the packages that you can buy at some of the stores or whatever else, and doing it on your own. Because here's, if there's an estate that gets challenged, a really good lawyer, estate lawyer, will sit there and ask, well, was the person of sound mind at the time that they signed the will? And depending who the witness is, again, that could be challenged. So just do it professionally. Call TVH Legal, speak with Sonia. She'll be able to help you through that process.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think the last one here, Ryan, we're going to talk about in retirement is really the unexpected emergencies. I can give examples. I've retired clients who own used vehicles where there's no longer warranty, and all of a sudden the transmission blows up,
Mhm.
and it's like, oh, now I need $5,000 for a brand new transmission, or the motor blows up, or something happens to the roof of their home. So again, to be able to have some assets set aside for those unexpected emergencies. And usually what I say to people, because most people load up on their RSPs for their future, not recognizing the tax problem they're going to create for themselves. And you don't want to all of a sudden have to pull out 5, 10, $20,000 out of your RIFR or RSP to deal with some of these emergency unexpected situations, because you're going to pay a lot more in tax to net out the amount that you want, right? So
Mhm.
proper planning, we can avoid blowing up the retirement accounts, but proper planning, we can make sure that we have money set aside for those unexpected emergencies.
Yeah.
Right? Anything else you want to add to that?
Uh, Unexpected emergencies can come in any way, shape, or form. Um, Home repair, a divorce, um, you know, car repair. It can be a bunch of different things. And when it comes to having these open dialogues with friends and family to ask them, you know, in your retirement, what are some unexpected things that happened, uh, that as I prepare for retirement that I should be planning for? And whether you're in your already in retirement, or you're in your late 40s and kind of doing that kind of like final stretch into retirement, that's giving you 20 years to be able to prepare for whatever might come up, and how to truly diversify not only your portfolio but your plan, and have strategies in place for things that are hopefully controllable. But for those uncontrollable things, it's always nice to have a little extra cash on the side. So
Yeah. So what I would say for anyone who's planning to make some form of contribution over the next few weeks into your retirement plan, if you've never ever really walked through the process of determining how much money you actually need to support your retirement lifestyle and your retirement income, because it will change. One thing that we do say to people is when you retire, every day is the weekend, right? Like during our working years, the most expensive days of the week are Saturdays and Sundays, the weekend. That's when we're going out and, buying stuff and hanging out with friends and having dinner and watching movies and whatever else, right? When you retire, every day is the weekend. So it becomes very expensive. So if you've never walked through the process, I encourage you to reach out to both Ryan and I. You can go to tvhfinancial.ca and you can connect with us through there, or you can email us financial@tvhgroup.ca, or even call us 647-727-4668. We'd be more than happy to run through that analysis with you and for you to basically determine like how much are you going to need to set aside so you can meet your retirement goals. It's funny how sometimes when I walk through clients, they're thinking like the worst case, and a lot of times like, actually, you know what, you're doing pretty good. You can even potentially retire earlier than you expected, or retire with more money than you expected. And then there's the opposite where we've had too many people. It's just like you really have a lot of work cut out for you
mm,
to make so either you need to adjust your expectations or you need to change what you're doing today to make sure that you can reach those goals in the future. So yeah, I'd encourage people to reach out to us. Ryan, anything else that you want to share with people?
retirement is really about, obviously enjoying your life and enjoying the time. Hopefully you're enjoying your life more than just waiting for retirement to happen, but it's really about, enjoying all the hard work that you have. And it's really essential that you take the time to be prepared, to understand what the hidden costs are, to talk with us, for us to help starting to map out potential pain points that you have, and kind of prepare for some of the expenses. And really, this will help you have a more successful and fulfilling retirement. And as we always say, like, take the ease away. Take all the stress away. You're retired. You have to deal with that that annoying work coworker, or whatever it is that ailed you throughout your working years. We want to take the ease out of it. So yeah,
Yeah,
let us help you
for
stay on
sure.
track.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd love for you to again like and share and do all those other wonderful things on our social media platforms. So look for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, obviously our podcast. We also have a blog post, so we're going to be sending out a blog post about this topic. We're going to summarize there like the top 10 unexpected expenses in retirement. So until the next one, Ryan, I think we're going to have another one next week.
Yep.
We'll keep it as a surprise in terms of what the topic will be, but
Yep.
we have another one in the books, and looking forward to our next recording next week. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Ryan. Talk to
Take
you
care.
later. Okie dokie.